My name is Sergeant Rick Schiff. I'm an 11-year veteran of the San Francisco Police Department. I hold the department's highest Medal of Honor for bravery. That used to mean a lot more to me than it does now. What I'd like to talk to you about today is my now 7-year-old daughter. This is an identical twin. Her sister is now dead. Her sister, when she was 4 years old, Kristen, developed a highly malignant brain tumor that had spread throughout her spine and her brain. The doctors told us that we had really two options: take her home, let her die, or bring her in for massive dosages of chemo and radiation simultaneously. In either event, she was going to die. They were quite certain of that, and very quickly. Believing her only chance to be the standard route, we gave her the chemo and radiation. It burned her skull so bad she had second-degree burns and her hair never came back. To change her diapers, we had to wear rubber gloves because her urine was so toxic and it burned her. At the end of 6 months, miraculously, she survived the standard treatment, although there was a high expectation she wouldn't. She still had cancer. We were told, sorry, we've done everything we can. Now she's going to die, probably within a couple of months. My wife and I, choosing not to accept that, started reading. The first book I picked up, the third chapter, discussed Dr. Brzezinski. As you may guess, I have some expertise in fraud. In fact, I'm quite certain there are enough attorneys in the room that I could be vordeered as an expert in fraud. And I conducted my own investigation. I have no doubt the man is not a fraud. I have no doubt that he does what he does out of earnest belief that his medicine works. And now you're in a position to judge for yourselves whether it works or not. But it's well established by the FDA that it's non-toxic. 18 months later, we took my daughter off the anti-neoplastin. She had not died. She had no signs of tumor. She remained free for 18 months of cancer. Within a month, the cancer was widespread in her brain. We put her back on Brzezinski's. By the way, at the objections of our doctors, for some reason felt that it had failed her. We put her back on. Within 9 weeks, the tumor was completely gone. She died last July of neurological necrosis. Her brain fell apart from the radiation. The autopsy showed that she was completely cancer-free. Out of 52 cases of that disease ever, no one died cancer-free, just Chrissy. So she didn't die of a terminal illness. She died of my inability to care for her properly, and she died from bad advice. She died because there's a government institution that disseminates false information and is not looking out for the welfare of the people. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I swore an oath 11 years ago, and I think most of us in this room swore it at one time or another, to uphold the Constitution. It says life right in the beginning.
Raided several medical marijuana dispensaries today, enforcing federal law that makes selling or possessing marijuana illegal. But for some families, that drug is a godsend in treating a variety of diseases. 2-year-old Cash Hyde was diagnosed last year with a stage 4 brain tumor. He nearly died more times than his family can count and was miserable from the high-dose chemo coursing through his tiny body until his dad turned to a controversial place and gave cannabis to his young son. KXLY4's Melissa Luck is here, been working on this story.
Yeah, controversial, Robin, is an understatement. Medical marijuana is a political football both here in Washington and in Cashy's home state of Montana. But his father said to me, when your child is dying of cancer, you'll do anything you can to help. His choice defied doctors, but he says saved Cashy's life.
June 21st, 2008 is a day Mike and Callie Hyde will never forget.
He was just a healthy little boy, born there in Missoula.
Cash Michael Hyde's very first birthday, a family now complete. They never could have imagined the journey little Cashy's life would take.
He was just your average, happy little kid, and then he just started to get sick.
It was shortly before Cashy's second birthday when Dad Mike knew something wasn't right.
Well, he started being very tired, sleeping a lot, very cranky. He started to throw up. We started taking him to the doctor, and doctor would tell us that he had mono.
For 6 weeks, it was the same diagnosis over and over. But Mike refused to accept what doctors were telling him. He knew, like any parent would, that something was terribly wrong.
I was like, it feels like he's dying in my arms. We need to take him somewhere else, you know. And so we took him to the ER, and that's when they did a CAT scan on him, and they found a 4.5 centimeter tumor in his brain. They loaded him up, and they were gone to Salt Lake City within a matter of a couple hours of finding the tumor.
At Salt Lake's Primary Children's Hospital came the devastating news. Their little boy was facing incredible odds. Brain surgery revealed a peanut tumor wrapped around Kashie's optic nerve.
When we arrived in Salt Lake in May, Kashie was so sick that, I mean, his eye was starting to get pushed out. He was sleeping 16 to 18 hours a day. He was vomiting. He was pretty much as sick as, you know, you can get without being, you know, on your deathbed.
Doctors cut into Kashie's brain to remove what they could, only about 10% of the tumor. The Hydes could only hope aggressive treatment could get the rest. 3 rounds of chemo followed by stem cell rescue, then 3 rounds of high-dose chemo after that. A difficult treatment plan for anyone, so imagine what it did to a 2-year-old kid.
So the first night of chemo, we did 10 hours with the seizures down in the ICU. And, you know, the doctors told us then he could have brain damage from these seizures. We don't know where it's going to be in the morning. Just going to have to wait and find out.
Kashie spent his 2nd birthday in a hospital bed, swollen and sick from the medication intended to save his life. Doctors were uncertain he would make it to his 3rd birthday.
It's overwhelming, I guess, to say the least. And we had a lot of scary things happen in June. He got a blood infection, went into septic shock, went to the ICU, ended up coding, and they had to resuscitate him. I was standing like 2 feet away. I had to watch the whole thing. There was a lot of days we were getting told we weren't going to beat it. You know, you're not going to take him home. He is going to die. And those are the days where you really got to really believe.
They believed and they prayed. High-dose chemo was killing his cancer, but it was making Kashie sicker than ever. He was taking 120 milligrams a day of 5 different drugs to try to make him comfortable. But that, Mike said, wasn't helping ease Kashie's pain.
That's going to help get the tape off.
I'm going to hold this, okay?
By the end of September, he had gone 40 days without eating. He was vomiting 9 to 10 times a day. He couldn't lift his head off his pillow. He was literally laying there shivering in his bed. And the doctors came in, and I said, is there anything we can do for Cash?
The doctors had no answers, so Mike found his own. Relief in the form of a controversial oil, cannabis, illegal for you and I to possess, and something Kashie's doctors wouldn't even discuss. Mike got authorization to give Kashie the oil, and without telling them why, he told the doctors to wean Kashie off the nausea cocktail. Inserted through Kashie's feeding tube, a tiny amount of oil replaced all those drugs. The result, Mike says, was almost immediate.
You're watching a kid that hasn't had the will to eat in 4 months, 5 months, actually take a bite of something. He hadn't eaten a thing in 40 days, and it was really incredible just to watch him take a bite of a piece of cheese, you know. It's showing that he wants to live.
There you go.
Kashie did his last round of high-dose chemo with no anti-nausea drugs. Mike says the doctors told him they were amazed. Mike never told them why.
I wanted to tell him, hey, he's on cannabis oil, but I was afraid they would take it away from him.
We wanted to tell you about the side effects, the possible dangers of giving medical marijuana to a kid as young as Kashie. But even though it's perfectly legal in Washington and in his home state of Montana, we couldn't get a single doctor to talk to us on camera. That's how we ended up here at the THC clinic in East Spokane.
And I see a lot of folks, and they come in from all walks of life and say they receive benefit.
Sherry Allen is a nurse practitioner and sign off on their permits.
What I try to do here at this office is create an atmosphere that is truly medical, because I do believe that cannabis is a medical, and we are trying to use it as a medicine.
She believes in the power of this drug and its benefit for cancer patients. She signs off sometimes on 50 patients a day. Then I asked her about authorizing marijuana for kids.
It is not common, okay? And I'm not going to say whether or not I've authorized for a child.
It's a typical answer, as doctors are concerned about federal law and company policies. But Mike Hyde doesn't care about the controversy or about the political battle over this drug. He cares that his son survived and is convinced not only did the cannabis oil make Kashi feel better, it prevented long-term damage to his organs. For Mike, the living proof is in this vibrant 2-year-old boy.
Yeah, it's very controversial, it's very scary, but there's nothing more scary than about losing your child.
A week after we did this interview, Kashi was back in Salt Lake for scans, finding out he's cancer-free. He's back home in Missoula, back with his family, back to teasing his big brother Colty. Kashi will spend his 3rd birthday like every kid should, with the fight of his life behind him.
Controversy brewing in a small town over this. Is it a cure-all or contraband?
Now, here's somebody dying from cancer, they're not dying anymore. Here's somebody that had something else, well, they're cured. And this is what's doing it.
Also, you've heard that milk does a body good, but we'll tell you what may be even better for your bones as Global National continues. In a small Nova Scotia town, one man is trying to get the word out about what he says are the healing properties of hemp oil, marijuana. But as Ross Lord explains, where he's spreading the word has created a major headache with no cure in sight.
In McCann, Nova Scotia, this oil is gaining a reputation as a miracle drug.
That's the cure right there.
Oil extracted from marijuana plants. Rick Simpson has been making it and giving it to friends and neighbors. He calls it hemp oil. Others know it as weed oil. In small doses, he says, it makes you well without getting you high.
Well, you can't deny your own eyes, can you? Now, here's somebody dying from cancer, they're not dying anymore. Here's somebody that had something else, well, they're cured. And this is what's doing it.
The McCann branch of the Royal Canadian Legion was impressed too. So impressed, it hosted meetings like this one, aimed at spreading the word about hemp oil. But when they planned a big public meeting, higher-ups at the Legion shut them down.
The provincial command came here the day of the meeting, and they come in, they locked the doors, and then I come into the yard, and I had 2 RCMP officers here that told me I was not allowed on the property.
They are using the Royal Canadian Legion, its name, its insignias, and the buildings as a platform to promote the use of hemp oil as a medicinal drug.
I don't care if this medicine comes from a tomato plant, a potato plant, or a hemp plant. If the medicine's safe and helps and works, why not use it?
For Rick Dwyer, it's an emotional issue. One of the testaments to hemp oil's healing power is his father, a military veteran suffering from lung cancer.
And this last time I was in, I didn't know it, but they said I was going to die in 24 hours, but I didn't. So I took the oil and everything worked out right.
But the Legion isn't budging. They've suspended the entire executive of this branch, along with any activities planned for the building, until they install a new management team.
There is no provincial or federal regulation which states that this marijuana can be grown and produced into hemp oil for medicinal purposes. And therefore, it's illegal as far as the province is concerned. And the Royal Canadian Legion does not back illegal operations.
Simpson has had trouble with the law. The RCMP confiscated 1,600 marijuana plants from his backyard last year. Plants he claims were grown for medicinal purposes. A court case is unresolved, and so are questions within the Legion about whether hemp oil is medicine or menace.
That goes against the general bylaws of the Royal Canadian Legion.
What I did, I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud of it.
And for now, since the Legion is the town's only meeting place, getting the word out about hemp oil will prove to be more difficult.
The chemical in marijuana kills brain cancer cells. The study suggests that THC causes brain cancer cells to essentially eat themselves. In both studies with mice and humans, tumors exposed to the drug shrink. The study's authors say patients didn't suffer any toxic side effects, and the results could be used to develop new strategies for preventing tumor growth.
Strong evidence the active ingredient in marijuana may stop early cases of Alzheimer's disease. Researchers at the Scripps Institute found THC may prevent the progression of the disease by preserving levels of an important neurotransmitter that allows the brain to function. The discovery could lead to a more effective drug treatment for Alzheimer's, which is the leading cause of dementia among the elderly.
Here's a story you'll want to remember. Could marijuana really help with memory? A new study out of Ohio University is looking into that possibility. Scientists say that specific elements of marijuana can be good for the aging brain by reducing inflammation. They also say it could possibly even stimulate the formation of new brain cells. Inflammation of the brain is believed to contribute to memory impairment.
Hundreds of studies suggest cannabis oil specifically has potential.
Harvard University did a study where brain cancer was being cured by cannabis oil.
But there are roadblocks to continuing that study.
We can't use it on humans because basically the government has taken all the rights.
At Canada's University of Saskatchewan found that a synthetic chemical derived from marijuana actually makes new cells grow in rat brains, Mr. Capehart. After giving rats high doses of the chemical, researchers found a 40% increase in new brain cell formation. Drugs like alcohol and nicotine suppress the growth of new cells, but the study shows marijuana may actually be good for brain cell growth.
One of the 400 compounds in cannabis is about to be tested in human trials to see if it can delay the onset of memory loss. A plant so controversial for its mind-altering qualities is exciting experts about its possible clinical benefits.
Cannabis as it is, normally smoked, has mind-blowing properties, and there are compounds in there which has this hallucinogenic properties. However, some of the indications for Alzheimer's in a mouse model is just a single compound that's used from cannabis plant material which is extracted, and it can stop the memory loss. Now, if we take that single compound and apply it to humans in clinical trials, we could prove for those 400,000 Alzheimer's patients whether it could be used for those.
Studies in mice have shown that the cannabis derivative called cannabidiol, which is not hallucinogenic, can prevent the progression to memory loss in Alzheimer's disease.
We now find that marijuana fights cancer, and they've known about it for nigh on 40 years, which means that if you think back to all the friends and family who've croaked from cancer, and think about these monsters in government who knew that marijuana showed promise in curing cancer, we have one of the biggest genocides, second biggest genocide next to usury, in the history to be talking about. Study finds no cancer-marijuana connection. By Mark Kaufman, Washington Post, staff writer, Friday, May 26, 2003. The largest study of its kind has unexpectedly concluded that smoking marijuana, even regularly and heavily, does not lead to lung cancer. The new findings were against our expectations, said Donald Tashkin of the University of California at Los Angeles, a pulmonologist who studied marijuana for 30 years. Tashkin's group had hypothesized that marijuana would raise the risk of cancer on the basis of earlier human studies, lab studies of animals, and the fact that marijuana users inhale more deeply and generally hold the smoke in their lungs longer than tobacco smokers, exposing them to the dangerous chemicals for a longer time. In addition, Tashkin said previous studies found that marijuana tar has 50% higher concentrations of chemicals linked to cancer than tobacco cigarette tar. While no association between marijuana smoking and cancer was found, the study findings did find a 20-fold increase in lung cancer among people who smoke 2 or more packs a day. He says, we hypothesized that there would be a positive association between marijuana use and lung cancer, and that the association would be more positive with heavier use. He said, what we found instead was no association at all, and even a suggestion of some protective effect against cancer. Federal health and drug enforcement officials have widely used Tashkin's previous work on marijuana to make the case that the drug is dangerous. Tashkin said that while he still believes it's potentially harmful, its cancer-causing effects appear to be of less concern than previously thought. Actually, no concern.
This is cancer. This is cannabis oil. This is cancer
on cannabis oil. Any questions?
I'd have questions too if I was you. So here's my story. My name's Dave Triplett, and I cured my skin cancer using cannabis oil.
Several years ago, I had 2 lesions removed from the tip of my nose. In 2009, the lesions began to return in several places. I went to the doctor, and the doctor gave me a prescription for a cream. He told me to put the cream on my entire face and neck. He also told me to wait until after the holidays to use it because it may cause some redness. I did a Google search for cream and I realized it was chemotherapy. Next, I found some photojournals of people who have used the cream. The photos, as you can see, are quite alarming. After seeing the results of what the chemotherapy cream can do, I decided to look into alternatives. Recently, my friend Jennifer had sent me a video about Rick Simpson curing cancer with hemp oil. It was called Run from the Cure, so I decided to start there. After I watched Run from the Cure, I began to do some searches. I was really surprised at how much information was available. These are a few of the videos I found.
Breast cancer kills more than 41,000 American women every year. Researchers in the San Francisco lab are working to shrink that number, and they're doing it with an unusual weapon, marijuana.
It's not just THC. These trichomes contain CBD, another valuable chemical.
We're fascinated by this stuff.
And what we found is that this compound called cannabidiol was particularly effective at inhibiting aggressive breast cancer.
I discovered that despite my training in medicine and science, I had been brainwashed that this substance, marijuana, that in fact it's remarkably non-toxic. There's never been a death from it. And I went from there, and that started me on a long interest in researching this substance.
Marijuana may actually help reduce the risk of certain types of cancer. A new Brown University study found long-term pot users are 62% less likely to develop head and neck cancers. This includes cancers of the mouth, tongue, nose, sinus, throat, and lymph nodes.
Breast cancer, prostate cancer, pheochromocytoma, lymphoma, leukemia, skin cancer, a whole variety of cancers that in experimental situations, meaning in tissue culture or in animal models, you can in fact show that cannabinoids kill these cancers.
Into its bloodstream and was carried to its brain. There it met the cannabinoid receptor evolved so many millions of years earlier in the humble sea squirt. And it just so happened to fit, like a key in a lock.
Researchers suggest chemicals found in pot called cannabinoids can have an anti-tumor effect.
People are quite excited about the ability of these cannabinoids to kill cancer cells.
After a few more searches and watching a few more videos, I decided it was time to get myself some cannabis oil. Because I live in California, I was able to go to one of the dispensaries to get some hemp oil. At the dispensaries, they refer to it as hash oil. It's also called honey oil and cannabis extract. Most people in California, such as myself, refer to it as hash oil. I used the oil for 3 to 4 weeks before I saw any results. Then the results were dramatic. Not only was the oil healing my nose, but it was bringing cancer to the surface that I didn't even know was there. Here are the pictures of my nose being healed. Cannabis extract, or hash oil. As you saw, the cancer was pulled to the surface and healed. Pretty dramatic. In this side view, you can clearly see the cancer being pulled to the surface and healed. The greenish-brown stuff you see is the oil. Once I realized that the hash oil had cured my cancer, I began to ask myself questions. Why hadn't my doctor heard about this? Why hadn't I heard about this before? If cannabis cures cancer, why would it be illegal? As I did more research, I began to realize it's about profit and politics.
But unless big pharmaceutical companies are behind these things, they may go nowhere, is that it?
Well, actually, Lloyd, I've had 2 other stories where drugs have shown great promise in the preclinical phase, and because they were orphan drugs and no one picked up, nobody could get the patent on it, they've gone nowhere. Drug companies won't be interested in funding studies for a drug that won't make them a profit.
This drug has great promise, so why aren't companies and institutions lining up to get behind it?
Because the drug isn't patented, if someone invests in researching it, they're not going to make a profit because anyone can make it. It costs, some say, about $100 million to get a new drug through all the phases of testing onto the market. So it will be interesting to see if this old drug actually gets a new chance at becoming an anti-cancer medication.
Typically get this eureka kind of feeling, and it's actually the most exciting thing scientists can get.
I'm not going to have time to go into the history and politics of cannabis. I'll save that for the next video. I can tell you that cannabis used to be a very, very common medication. It was available in many forms. Here's a few examples of antique cannabis medications. This is a homeopathic cannabis sativa bottle. These are some cannabis indica tablets. This is a cannabis indica cough syrup. This is a bottle of cannabis pills. This is a bottle of cannabis extract. This is another bottle of cannabis extract. This is Dr. James cannabis indica extract. This is a corn cure. Its main ingredients were cannabis indica. This medicine was taken away from us, and now people are needlessly dying. It's absolutely ridiculous that this harmless medication isn't available to cancer patients. I ask you to please do everything within your power to get the word out that cannabis, without a doubt, cures cancer. The National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, and members of our government have known since 1975 that cannabis cures cancer. The 1975 report has resurfaced and is now available online. It has become clear to me that because of politics and money, a cancer cure has been kept from us and people are needlessly dying. If you've lost somebody from cancer, the chances are their life could have been saved if the oil was available to them. Please share this information with every doctor, researcher, and news outlet you can think of. All we want to do is heal ourselves.
You see, when I talk about these age-related illnesses, we're all aging, but we don't all come down with cardiovascular disease. We don't all come down with autoimmune disease. We don't all come down with cognitive dysfunction. We don't all come down with cancer. But the chances are we're going to come down with one of them. All right? And here we have this one drug that's able to help us holistically with our biochemistry to restore balance. You know, cannabinoids kill cancer cells in many cases. People are not aware of that. They think cancer, cannabis, anti-nausea. It's way beyond that.
Really? Can you talk more about that? We have time. Would you please?
There have been a number of cancers that in experimental situations, breast cancer, prostate cancer, pheochromocytoma, lymphoma, leukemia, skin cancer, a whole variety of cancers that in experimental situations, meaning in tissue culture or in animal models, you can in fact show that cannabinoids kill these cancers. And a lot of people are quite excited about the ability of these cannabinoids to kill cancer cells. There are some studies that have shown that cannabis, I think they specifically used THC in that case. It was an earlier study from quite a long time ago, I think in the 70s, where they looked at cancer, in particular rats, I think, and showed that they were able to inhibit cancer, lung cancer specifically. In Madrid, it was a different story, not from the 70s. This was done by Manuel Guzman's group within the past less than 10 years, and what they showed there was that originally that THC, when injected into a brain tumor in mice and rats, a significant number of those animals the tumor would regress and disappear, so that you actually had survival of rats that would otherwise die. And they examined all the surrounding nerve tissue, and that was all fine, because remember, once again, cannabinoids protect nerves. So here you have such an interesting situation. This anti-cancer drug now, THC, is killing tumors and protecting the surrounding tissue. That's totally the opposite of what happens with all other chemotherapeutic approaches. So it was a result of those animal studies that they did a fairly small clinical trial, because after all, you wouldn't want too many dying people to get high, you know. I mean, that wouldn't be good for them. But they did find in this fairly small study that, if I'm remembering correctly, there was some extension of life, and also they were able to show that a particular very important biomolecule called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, was turned down. And there are other studies that have shown that cannabinoids turn down VEGF. And the reason this is interesting is this is one of the therapeutic targets that a lot of pharmaceutical companies are trying to develop drugs for. The reason being that cancers, we all actually are probably making little cancers in us all the time. The reason we don't get tumors and the reason we don't die of cancer is because in the absence of these VEGF and similar compounds, there are about 30 of them now, that in the absence of those compounds, the tumor can't get a blood supply. So it just kind of seals itself off, and the immune system basically, you know, keeps it under control, and nothing happens. But and cannabinoids have been shown to turn down VEGF, and that's what they found in that clinical study, that VEGF seemed to have been turned down as well. So it's quite an amazing spectrum of compounds that are in that plant. And what's so unique and incredible about them is they are touching on this incredible system that pervades all of us and regulates everything from, I like to tell people, cradle to grave, because it's in mother's milk. So it's soothing you from childbirth, it's stimulating the appetite of newborns, it's helping them promote growth. I think cannabis is a miracle drug because there's nothing else that impacts on so many of our illnesses. So what are the kinds of things that we can do to try and promote health in these areas? On the one hand, everybody should make sure they take in enough essential fatty acids. They're called essential because we can't make them. And certainly I would say one of the best sources for that is that we should be consuming hemp oil. And the reason I say that as opposed to fish oil is because you can get organic hemp oil, so it's not going to be contaminated with things like mercury. And that's going to allow our bodies to make our endocannabinoids. We often hear about the beneficial effects of things like omega-3s and omega-6s. At least some of the attributes of those compounds are the result of them being converted into these endocannabinoids, into these marijuana-like compounds. So at least that way your body can do what your body can do. You're giving it the tools to make the things that you need. But in many cases, that's not sufficient, and we have to supplement beyond what our body can make. And there's only one planet, or there's only one plant on the planet that has the capacity to really mimic the way our body works with these endocannabinoids, and that's marijuana. So marijuana actually directly mimics these particular compounds, and as a result, it has these strong neuroprotective effects. But because marijuana and these endocannabinoids, their activities are so pervasive in our body, they literally regulate every system in your body, your immune system, digestive system, reproductive system, cardiovascular system. Everything in your body is homeostatically maintained by endocannabinoids, meaning balance. They are how our body tries to balance how we interact with our environment when our environment becomes stressful for us. Stressful psychologically, stressful biochemically. So these are very, very critical compounds, and the use of cannabis can have a profound effect in terms of helping to stop nerve degeneration, helping restore functional nerves, helping restore new ways of thinking. And this is just really touching on the surface of the humongous number of benefits that this plant can have for so many different illnesses. It's not that we should be limiting it to one thing or another. In my mind, for most age-related illnesses, and a lot of these toxin-related illnesses fall into that category in terms of how they affect our cardiovascular system and their immune system and our nervous system and cause cancer. These are all really illnesses that fit under the umbrella of age-related illnesses. And they all have at their basis inflammatory kinds of responses that produce free radicals, and what our cannabinoid system is evolved to do over many hundreds of millions of years has been to protect us from those kinds of imbalances, to restore the kind of health that we need. And because of our environment in particular, and because we are living longer, we need to be able to adapt very rapidly today. And we can't do that on an evolutionary scale. The way for us to do that as people, as intelligent people, is to make sure we're eating good diets, stay away from toxins, and eat these essential fatty acids, and when necessary, consume cannabinoids.
Now, when it comes to medical marijuana, I have more of a practical view than anything else. I mean, my attitude is that if it's an issue of doctors prescribing medical marijuana as a treatment for glaucoma or as a cancer treatment, I think that should be appropriate, because there really is no difference between that and a doctor prescribing morphine or anything else.
Shamans, physicians, and pharmacists have dabbled in the notion of marijuana as medicine for thousands of years, but the relief patients feel is largely anecdotal. Marijuana's status as a Schedule I drug means that, according to the federal government, it has no accepted medical use. The U.S. government strictly controls all American marijuana studies, and researchers who want to study cannabis must obtain it from this facility at the University of Mississippi. By some accounts, the supply is extremely limited and of questionable quality. And some scientists claim that if their research might show potential positive medical uses for marijuana, their requests are rejected. It's a charge the government denies. But in other nations, getting cannabis to scientists is less complicated. Israel is among the leaders in medical marijuana research. From his lab bench in Jerusalem, Raphael Meshulam has fathered nearly 2 generations of peer-reviewed medical research. He first discovered THC in 1964.
Cannabis, although it had been investigated, nobody had really isolated it in pure form, and neither were all the other compounds there. So I thought that it's high time that somebody should do that.
For 40 years at Hebrew University, researchers study effects of THC and other cannabinoids on people and laboratory animals. Meshulam dissolves the THC in an oil-based solution. In this form, measured doses can be administered accurately. Researchers here have witnessed promising results in the treatments of brain trauma, diabetes, cancers, and osteoporosis. 20-year-old Eyal Preisler underwent a bone marrow transplant a year and a half ago. Since then, his body experiences a chronic quasi-rejection called graft versus host disease.
I am treated by the THC drops for 2 months already, meaning that I just started and I already saw changes. Whether it is the digestive system, the diarrhea that is gone, and my skin that was very hard is now softer and back to its original state. My appetite is back. It significantly increases the appetite, and I actually gained 4 kilos in the past 2 months. I need to gain a lot more weight to get back to where I was.
Each dose that Eyal takes is as measured as any prescribed medicine. Most marijuana taken as medicine in America is not.
Medical marijuana in the States means use of marijuana against diseases. Now, from my point of view, medical marijuana is not well defined. It should be better defined. If you take aspirin, you want to take 500 milligrams of aspirin. You don't want to say, well, I don't know how much I'm getting, 20 milligrams or 2 grams. I don't see any difference why one should have a different attitude when working with marijuana. And if marijuana can have anything between 2% and 20% THC, I don't think that this is the right way to do it.
One thing is certain. Much cannabis today has no resemblance to the plant of our ancestors. This weed, the proverbial sow's ear of yesterday's cannabis, has become a silk purse.
Life seems to be very complicated in every place of the world. Most of us are anxious from time to time. Most of us are depressed from time to time. We want to change that. And in many cases, such a change can be brought forward by cannabis. So that's why people use it. That's all.
So if a stranger walked up to you and poured pebble-like seeds into your hand and then said, plant them and your harvest can be made into rope, cloth, or paper, it could help the sick or intoxicate. What would you say? Would you keep the seeds or chuck them away?